the Pistachio. Now I want to talk a bit about rock music and who killed rock music. Now, like a good murder mystery, I want to actually leave my conclusions or the conclusion of this story to the very end. So you only find out what happened in the last page. I want to sort of build up and draw the whole thing out like a suspense thing. Now, first of all, what is rock music? Now, you'd have to be a bit sort of dead not to know, but there was one girl I heard describe it. She was a young girl, I don't know, Z generation or whatever they call it now. And she said, "Oh, isn't that the music where they just scream?" And I thought, yeah, that's right. But it's more than that. It's sort of, to me, it's probably the era of the electric guitar. And with the rise and fall of the electric guitar came the rise and fall of rock music, I reckon. But anyway, basically I want to maybe talk a little bit about why rock music became so important in the first place. It actually became a very socially active and interesting, influential thing. Normally, like, people just, oh yeah, well, I like music, but this actually became very ingrained in society and important at one stage. And I think it actually had a lot to do with electric guitar. Now, the reason I say that is because you can track the beginnings, like rock just started off with electric guitar, and pretty much it died with an electric guitar in its hands, I reckon. So let's just talk a little bit about the electric guitar and why it had an influence on rock music. Basically, it started off with jazz because the guitar could not compete with the piano. And if you've ever tried this, you know what it's like. It's like you're strumming along and you just can't hear yourself, so you like, just strum as loud as you can. It doesn't matter what chord you're playing. No one knows what you're doing anyway, and no one can hear you. You just pretend, and you can get away with it, but there's no point. So what they had to do is try and electrify or amplify the guitar. They did that using hollow body guitars to start, but they ended up electrifying the guitar using pickups and an amp. Now, I say it started with rock, it started with jazz, but really rock started in a way with Elvis, even though he stole all his music from black musicians and repackaged it as for a wide audience. But he had an electric guitar, and that's really where it starts, because what people started to do is muck around with the knobs and find interesting sounds and things like that. And in a way, it just opened the doors to so many more interesting sounds. And you can sort of talk about things like keyboards and all that when it comes to interesting sounds, but that's sort of another thing. It's going to be too long if I go into that. But pretty much the electric guitar, like, you turn up the gain and, oh wow, it starts to sound really powerful and interesting. So you go into that area, and then basically a guy called Roger Mayer started to hook up with Jimi Hendrix, and he started to sort of add a whole lot of electronic effects to the guitar, and that really blew the whole thing open too. So in the 60s there's this big experimental thing with guitar. They got a bit bored of it, went back to roots rock and etc. Then you had Eddie Van Halen come along, who created a new guitar revolution, and that lasted about a decade until Kurt Cobain came along and killed it. And ever since then, it's been a slow decline, I reckon. I mean, some people reckon that rock finished at the end of the 50s, some at the end of the 60s, some at the end of the 70s, some at the end of the 80s. But I reckon it sort of went up, grew up, 60s experimental, 70s peaking, and then slow decline from there, with occasional revivals with things like punk and grunge sort of revived the whole thing. Anyway, what I want to do is go through the Wikipedia list of rock, just to show you how it's declined and how recycled. Now, I'm using Wikipedia, and all those people who think they're using Wikipedia, using it as a source. Well, anyway, first you got your early, like back in the beginning, back in 1955, blah, 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 Let There Be Rock, all that stuff. You know, you had your Elvis, your rock and roll. Then it says the in-between years, which I think soul music came in a bit there, and the surf music, which was instrumental guitar stuff with added reverb and things. So they were sort of experimenting with different sounds. And it says the golden age, mid to late 60s. You had the British invasion, Beatles, Rolling Stones, etc. And then you had a whole list of sort of innovations like garage rock, pop rock, blues rock, folk rock, psychedelic rock. So you had your folk rock, which was kind of Bob Dylan sort of stuff, and then psychedelic rock, which, you know, Pink Floyd and Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles kind of pioneered. But when you get to the progression, which is the late 60s to the mid 70s, it kind of goes back to the roots rock thing. You get progressive rock, jazz rock, glam rock, soft rock, hard rock, and early heavy metal, and Christian rock, which I can't really think of any good bands in, but maybe Bob Dylan at one stage, but that's about it. So you still got some innovation going there. Then you got punk and its aftermath, which really just usurped the whole progressive rock thing and turned it on its head. And then people got bored with that after 2 years, so you get experimenting with keyboards and all this stuff. So you get new wave and post-punk, which really, something called post means that it's almost exactly the same as the thing that without the post, but it's just done a little bit later. So really, it's like a bit of a revival thing going on with a little bit of things added, but it's really the same thing. New waves in genre in heavy metal, I guess thrash and all that stuff, which I really like. Heartland rock, Bruce Springsteen, and emergence of alternative rock, I suppose you have Sonic Youth and bands like that. Now, this is where it starts to go a bit downhill. Now, I quite like 90s music, but to me was a bit disappointing after the 80s. Now, you got grunge, which really is a recycle of 70s rock with a different drum sound. The only innovative band, I reckon, was Nirvana, because of their interesting chord progressions and things like that. The others really borrow a lot of 70s sounds. Anyway, Britpop, that's really a revival of Beatles kind of pop music. Post-grunge again, I mean, how is that much different to grunge? Not all that much. Pop-punk, I mean, punk with melody, wow. Indie rock, more staring at issues kind of stuff. Alternative metal, rap, rock, and new metal, I mean, it's like plasticine metal. And then another post, Britpop. In other words, I think in that category is like Coldplay, which really is just Britpop with a bit of U2 thrown in. Anyway, the new millennium. Now, I don't even want to go here. This is like, what the hell is going on? You got post, again, another post, hardcore, in other words, hardcore. Emo, which I reckon is it's just The Cure, which was in the 80s, or, you know, it's just that dreary kind of gothic music. Garage rock, which we covered in the 60s. Post-punk revival, I mean, that's a tautology, really. I mean, post plus punk plus revival is all over again. Contemporary heavy metal, metalcore, and retro metal, I mean, that's the same stuff recycled. And digital electronic rock, I don't even want to go there. I mean, it just goes to shit in that era. I mean, it's like, what's going on? Anyway, the mystery's kind of unfolding a bit slowly, but I got this book for Christmas, and it actually contains all the best rock bands in the world and a little bit of history on them, but it hasn't got Toto, so I don't know what's going on. But as it says here, world's greatest 250 rock acts, so yeah, I guess that's fair enough. But what I want to do is look at the R's here, because I think it gives a good idea of what happened to rock music. Now, Radiohead, they're still going, not surprisingly, even though they put out 5 crap albums in a row. Rage Against the Machine, which was early 90s band, but they're actually back together, even though after Audioslave they've come back together. Rainbow, who really cares? The Ramones split up in 96 because they all died, I think. Now, Red Hot Chili Peppers, that's an interesting one. Now, they had so many drugs that they kept the economy in South America going for about 20 years. But most of them are still alive. And they're still going. But the interesting thing about this is that John Frusciante actually left the band again. And they've got another guitarist. I didn't know that. Why would I know that? REM finally split up in 2011. Thank God. The Rolling Stones are still going. They're not dead. I mean, they make bloody, the Red Hot Chili Peppers look like Pat Boone, for goodness sake, when it comes to drugs. But most of them are still alive. And this is actually out of date, because I know Bill Wyman's still back in the band. I mean, he's probably coming out on a wheelchair, but I mean, he's still in the bloody band. What if we got Roxy Music? They got back together in 2001. But they haven't got Brian Eno, which is probably a good thing. But they're still going. And Rush, from 68 till present, they're still going. In fact, they released an album last year. Now, what does that tell you? That basically tells you that the answer to the mystery is that rock didn't die. It's still out there. They're still making records. These bands are still together or have come back together due to popular demand. You just don't hear about it in the media. That's the thing. I mean, I didn't know a lot of that information. But because I just don't, unless you go out of your way to track it down, you just don't know what's going on. But rock and roll ain't noise pollution, and rock and roll will never die.